This is a story about the inhumane brutality of two young individuals. Charles Starkweather was an American killer who, together with his girlfriend, murdered 11 people in Nebraska and Wyoming. His partner in crime, Carol Fugate, became the youngest person in U.S. history to be convicted of first-degree murder. Charles Raymond Starkweather was born on November 24, 1938, in Lincoln, Nebraska, to a respectable family. He had a significant birth defect, a knee joint deformation that caused his legs to bend inward. Additionally, Charles suffered from a severe stutter and nearsightedness, which made it impossible for him to read even the top line on an eye chart. He was also developmentally delayed, which affected his cognitive abilities. Due to these challenges, school was a struggle for him, and he became the target of bullying by other students. His teachers considered him to be mentally deficient. However, Charles began to engage in intense physical exercise to compensate for his other shortcomings. Soon, he started fighting back against those who bullied him, and later, he attacked anyone he simply didn't like. He wanted to emulate his favorite actor, James Dean, copying his appearance and rebellious demeanor. Charles was tormented by a deep sense of inferiority and believed he was incapable of doing anything right. As a result, he resigned himself to a life of misery. In 1956, he met Carol Fugate, a 13-year-old girl who became his girlfriend. Charles fell in love with Carol and wanted to cater to her every whim. He dropped out of school and started working as a loader in a warehouse, but his limited cognitive abilities made it difficult for him to succeed. His supervisor recalled, "Sometimes I had to explain the same thing to him 2 or 3 times. Out of all the workers in the warehouse, he was the dumbest one." The pretty young girl adored Starkweather and found his rebellious persona highly attractive. No matter what Charlie did, she saw it as perfectly acceptable. By the time Charles was 19, he realized that life had nothing to offer him but grueling labor and low-paying jobs. So, he decided that the only way to get ahead was through robbery and violence. The first murder. On November 30, 1957, Charles went to a gas station where he tried to buy a stuffed toy for his girlfriend on credit, but the attendant refused. Charles returned several times, and eventually, he came back armed with a shotgun. He forced the attendant, Robert Calvert, to give him $100 from the cash register, then drove him to a deserted area and made him get out of the car. When Calvert tried to grab the shotgun, it discharged during the struggle. Robert fell to his knees, and Charles shot him in the head, killing him. The next day, Charlie told Carol about the incident, leaving out the part about the murder. Despite this, Carol understood everything and, against all reason, approved of the killing of an innocent man. The killing spree begins. On January 21, 1958, Charles arrived at Carol's house with a .22 caliber rifle, intending to invite her stepfather, Marion Bartlett, to go hunting. He was greeted at the door by Carol's mother, Velda, who immediately told him they didn't want him around and that he should stay away from their daughter. The argument escalated into a fight when Carol returned home from school. When her stepfather tried to help his wife, armed with a hammer, Charles shot him, then killed Carol's mother and her little sister. After hiding the bodies, Charles and Carol had sex and stayed in the house with the decomposing corpses for another week. Carol posted a note on the door that read, "Stay away. There's a flu epidemic in the house." Then the deranged killer and his equally twisted companion sat down to watch TV and eat chips. When their food supplies ran out and worried relatives began calling, along with Carol's stepfather's boss, who was concerned about his absence from work, the sheriff was sent to check on the Fugate home. When Sheriff Bob Von Bush arrived, Carol answered the door but didn't let him in, claiming everyone was sick and he might catch it. After the sheriff left, the young couple realized it was no longer safe to stay there and decided to go on the run. Charles and Carol climbed into Charlie's old car and left town, eventually seeking refuge at the farm of 72-year-old August Meyer, an old family friend. By then, the sheriff had returned to the Fugate house and discovered signs of a bloody massacre. The pair murdered the elderly man and his dog, left the farm with only a few weapons, and continued on foot after their car got stuck in the mud. Later, they encountered Robert Jensen and Carol King, whom they killed after forcing them to return to Meyer's farm. There, Charles shot Jensen 6 times in the head and killed King with a single shot after raping her. In a jealous rage, Carol mutilated the girl's genitals with a hunting knife. Afterward, they continued their journey in the victim's car. More murders. The couple then broke into the home of 47-year-old Laura Ward, president of Capital Bridge and Capital Steel. Ward's wife, Clara, and her friend, Lillian Finkel, were at home at the time. Charles ordered Clara to make coffee, but when she tried to flee, he caught her and brutally killed her with a kitchen knife. He did the same to Lillian, who had been tied to the bed. Upon finding a newspaper with their names on the front page, the killer was thrilled. Later that evening, Ward was shot dead by the deranged Charles. The bodies were discovered the next day by Ward's business partners, who immediately alerted the authorities. Because Ward was a friend of Governor Anderson, the National Guard was quickly deployed to search for the murderers. Capture. On January 29th, Charles and Carol arrived in Wyoming, looking for a car to steal. They found a Buick with a sleeping man inside, traveling salesman Merle Collison. Carol shot him, but they couldn't drive away because the parking brake was engaged. A passing mechanic offered help, but noticing the dead man in the front seat and a rifle pointed at him, he fought back. At that moment, the sheriff arrived, and together they arrested Starkweather and Fugate. Charles made the biggest mistake of his life during his trial. He was given a choice: stay in Wyoming and face the gas chamber for killing Merle Collison, or return to Nebraska and be executed by electric chair for all the other murders. He chose the latter. The governor of Wyoming at the time opposed the death penalty, and Starkweather might have only received a life sentence. The jury took 24 hours to find him guilty on all counts, agreeing to the death penalty. Carol's attorney tried to prove she was a hostage, not an accomplice, but she was still found guilty. Since she was only 14 years old at the time of the murders, she received a life sentence instead of the electric chair. Charles Starkweather was executed in the electric chair at the Nebraska State Penitentiary at 12:01 a.m. on June 25, 1959. He refused to give any last words and only asked for the straps on his arms and legs to be loosened. The current was passed through his body, and at 12:04 a.m., the attending physician pronounced him dead. Aftermath. Carol Fugate was released on parole in June 1976. She changed her name and lived in Lansing, Michigan, where she worked as a nurse's aide at a local hospital and avoided the media, granting only one phone interview on August 8, 1996. In 2007, she married Frederick Clare, a machinist and meteorologist for the National Weather Service, who was 11 years her senior. After the wedding, the couple moved to Stryker, Ohio. On August 5, 2013, Carol and her husband were involved in a car accident. He died, but she survived with severe injuries.